are. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the How to Handle Conflict in Agile Teams webinar from Startup Patterns. Thank you for coming. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. All right, so let's get into it. So just briefly, Startup Patterns helps develop technology leaders and teams, offering unique and innovative coaching and training programs for your teams and consulting engagements for your organization. You can find out more about us at startuppatterns.com. And this webinar is all about conflict on Agile teams. So let's first define our terms. What is an Agile team? So a team is a group of people working together for a common purpose. It is not just a bunch of people who work next to each other or do similar tasks, right? So a team needs to have a common goal in order to be considered a team. An Agile team is a team whose purpose is to create a product, usually a software product, but not always. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the Agile methods in this webinar, but in general, the product is built in small batches and the team is collaborative and cross-functional. Agile teams these days can be outside of the software delivery world. There are now efforts to develop Agile sales, Agile marketing, Agile HR, Agile finance, Agile legal teams. All of that is underway and more across startups and corporate America. So Agile has expanded beyond the realm of just the software development teams. But for the most part, that's the perspective that I'm going to be taking in the webinar. It's around Agile teams, right? Okay. So what does conflict look like on Agile teams? Right? Well, it takes many shapes. There can be arguments. Members of the team frequently engage in the same argumentative behavior. Maybe two engineers argue about the architecture decisions or the code. Maybe UX and development argue about getting the design just right. Maybe developers push back on product or sales for not being specific enough in their requirements. So those are the most direct and obvious ways that you see conflict. There might also be blame or shame. Conflict can often arise under pressure or stress or after something bad has happened, right? Sometimes team members will avoid sharing responsibility and seek to blame one another or another team for outages or other failures. And finally, not all conflict is dramatic. Team members who engage in passive-aggressive behavior can actually mean that their needs are not being met in some way or their boundaries are not being respected, right? So what is the impact of conflict in an organization? Well, the big parts are morale, for one thing. So people in an organization with low morale tend to be less productive and less collaborative. And that leads to lower output per unit of input or lower productivity, right? That's how we define it. Further, when trust is eroded, so trust can be eroded by conflict, and when team members don't trust one another, collaboration becomes hampered, leading to longer delivery times and more mistakes. The overall throughput of a team in terms of speed and delivering less value to the customers for the same amount of time. The quality can suffer from a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration. The overall quality of the product can go down. And then really all of that leads to the top line revenue going down as customers are disappointed in the quality and the speed of delivery times. And the bottom line decreases as the costs of production soar. And so financial distress then can put more pressure on everyone, which further lowers morale and increases the likelihood of further conflict. And then we go around again. So these all compound on top of each other, right? So let's look at the causes of conflict. Okay? What causes conflict? This is going to be a model that might be familiar to some of you. This is the GRPI model. In 1972, Richard Beckart developed his GRPI model for looking at the causes of conflict on teams. And this model has been widely used in management and leadership training and consulting ever since. What's interesting about the model is that the diagnosis of problems starts at the bottom, right? So we have interpersonal relationships, that's the I, then procedures or processes, then roles and responsibilities, and then goals. And so in diagnosing an issue, you would start from the personal and work your way up. And then in building a team from scratch in development, you would work your way back down. You would start with goals and build out from there. But there's a catch. The real kicker is that 80% of conflicts on teams can be traced back to the goals misalignment, right? So goals in the model has a lion's share of the responsibility, okay? So let's look at that again, right? So goals at the top, responsible for 80% of the conflict on teams. What's further, the remaining 20% also has a lopsided distribution. So only 16% of conflict can be traced to role definition problems, 3.2% to processes, and about 0.5% to interpersonal issues when you really look at what's going on. But you have to work your way through the model in order to discover what the real problem is, right? So let's look at the first three of these causes of conflict. So goals, the problem primarily is that senior leadership has not clarified the objectives for the team in a way that everyone is aware of, are very clear, measurable, and everyone agrees that that's what the goals are. And conflicts arise from that ambiguity. Roles, there may be a lack of clear delineation of responsibility and authority for different tasks. And recall, in our definition of a team, we're not a group of people doing the same work. A team requires different people with different skills to collaborate to produce a common outcome, right? So, and then in the process, being unclear or ambiguous, well, that's pretty straightforward. There's lots of conflict that can emerge around processes being unclear. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do. And I'm going to focus in on interpersonal conflict for this last bit, right? So the reason for that is that even though I just told you that interpersonal conflicts are a tiny percentage of the total causes of conflict, they are the types of conflict that we all readily experience in our work and in our lives up close. And they're the ones that we can do something about right away. Goals and roles will likely require senior leadership to get involved to help solve them. And changing the process usually requires a number of people to get involved as well. But an interpersonal conflict can be addressed by you right now, right? So interpersonal conflict starts with you. And here are some things to think about in terms of being able to address it on a team. Conflict doesn't have to be emotional and full of anger. Conflict can be simply differences in perception and in personality styles. So in a team, when we're forming the team in the beginning, Agile teams often get started with some kind of charter that helps to define the goals, roles, and processes that the team is agreeing to. I think it's also really important to include tools like MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, or DISC, or Strength Finders, or any number of personality and strengths metrics tools to surface for everyone to see the different perceptions and personality types that are on the team and make that visible so that it becomes a source, that diversity becomes a strength rather than a blind spot, right? So that can be very powerful. Also, we all have emotional baggage and triggers that set us off automatically. So we may not know what those are. What are the things that you have a strong emotional response to? It's good to take some time to think about that in yourself so that we can acknowledge how to disentangle ourselves from those triggers when they occur. You also want to Identify your own role in the conflict. What are you doing to either start or encourage it, even if it's not on purpose or what you would consider your fault? It's important to get some distance and to look objectively at how you might be contributing to it. Um, there's another technique for distancing yourself from a conflict, which is in the great book on negotiation by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. He talks about putting yourself in the other person's shoes in the way that when people on the other side behave seemingly irrationally, that's usually not what's going on. Most people don't just act irrationally. There's usually some reason, and you just don't know what it is, right? But it can be helpful to do some visualization around what might that other person be going through and what scenarios are possible where that might actually explain their reaction, their behavior. And then finally, seek out coaching or support from a third party. You know, this HR typically has resources for this. Usually they can help surface some of these challenges and depressurize the situation. A lot of small companies don't have an HR department, and then a third party, such as us, Startup Patterns, would be a good fit. But really, the key thing here I want you to take away with the interpersonal is that before trying to figure out what's wrong with the other person, the best place to start is what's going on with us, and to spend some real time thinking about how our differences can be visualized and how we ourselves contribute to the conflict through our own sort of baggage and automatic programming that we all carry around. Right, right. Cool. So that's pretty much all the content for the conflict webinar. Thanks for coming. Alyssa Hauser will be posting URLs to our website and calendar links on the chat. And everyone here can book a free 1-hour consultation with me through the calendar link that's available. And just so you know, our amazing tech leadership coaching program, the Mindful Leadership Accelerator, is starting a new cohort next month. And anyone who's registered for this webinar will get a special discount for that program if you enroll. So just book a call with me if you have any questions, and we can talk.